Welcome back to our introduction to HTML and CSS, and in this tutorial we're actually going to be adding the navigation system to our website. So we're going to be adding our navigation styling. Remember, we've already added that UL element to the actual HTML structure, so now we're actually going to add the styling for that element to make it look more like a navigation system. So using our unordered list, we'll style our unordered list into a main navigation system. We'll also use the new nav tag to enclose our navigation system inside nav tag elements. This tag has been introduced in HTML5 and should enclose navigation systems in your HTML structure. It actually helps for the assistive devices for websites, and it also helps for your SEO and for your SEO optimization. Using classes, we'll style our navigation to fit the design of our site. We'll be doing some very specific styling as we work through this section of the tutorial. We'll be styling our classes and using specificity to target individual tags that are very unique to a particular class, and you're going to see that as we work through this. It actually gets into some pretty specific ways of targeting elements inside of CSS. And we'll also be introduced to pseudo elements in HTML and how using these elements we can target specific actions of a particular element. In other words, whether or not we're hovering over it or whether or not it's been clicked, or there's a lot of things we can do with these pseudo elements in CSS that actually make things appear a little bit differently based on what action's occurring with the element. So let's set up and style our navigation system inside of our website. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and drop out of our presentation, get into our development environment, and the first thing I want to do, and we should be doing this every time by the way, is confirming that that Apache server is up and running to make certain that we've got a good connection with our local host. I'm going to go ahead and bring in my text editor. I'll be using Sublime Text 3 during the demonstrations. You're probably using Notepad++ or Text Wrangler, depending upon what platform you're on. And I'm going to bring up Google Chrome, which will be my browser that I'll be using for this demonstration. So in this lesson, we're going to make a pretty simple navigation system using our unordered list we added to our HTML page. And that's the list that we added right up here at the very beginning of these exercises. There's many ways to do navigation in an HTML document. This is just one way to accomplish the task. And please keep that in mind. There are many different ways to do navigation inside of an HTML page. I'm going to show you one specific way that I use when I'm actually making horizontal menus using HTML and CSS. There's a lot of different ways to do this. We're going to actually be targeting that UL element for our styling. First we need to do is add classes to the navigation system. I'll be keeping this pretty simple, so I'll only be using a couple of classes in our navigation and targeting everything based on a combination of the classes and the tag names themselves. So first, let's add our nav element to the navigation system. What I want to do is come right inside that container, and I actually want to add a nav tag. This is a new tag for HTML5. And I'm going to come right down below where my closing UL is and add a closing nav tag for that UL. New tag in HTML5, but it is highly recommended that you use the navigation tag when you're setting up navigation on your sites. It actually helps for SEO and its proper HTML structure. The nav tag defines a set of navigation links. Notice that not all the links of a document should be inside a nav element. In other words, the nav element is intended for navigation links. We could actually have links inside of our page that link to an email or to a contact page, or that may not be considered a navigation group, so we wouldn't have those in nav elements or inside the nav tags. Browsers such as screen readers for disabled users can use this element to determine whether to omit the initial rendering of the content. And that's why, again, that a lot of these new HTML5 tags are so important to be used correctly, because more and more the internet's being set up for assisted devices. So not only does it help us properly structure our page, but it helps people with visual disabilities or some types of disabilities that are using assistive devices to work around the World Wide Web or around the internet. It makes it easier for them to use those types of systems. Alright, so now let's add a class to the opening nav element. So I'm going to come right up to that opening nav element. I'm going to give it a class, and it's going to be equal to main nav. I'm just going to type main nav. Inside there, I want to save those changes. Good time for you to put that into your document. Let's add a class to the home page, as this will be our active element. This class will go on the anchor tag of the home element. So I'm going to come right in here to the anchor tag of the home element and add a class inside that home tag. And I'm just going to call it active is the class name I'm going to give it. And the reason I'm doing this is I actually want to make one of our selections active, and we're actually going to set up a style based on that active class, and this is how we're going to determine which is active. As this page were to progress throughout the website, I just move that class to the other pages that would become active. Let's go ahead and save the changes in our browser, or save the changes. Go ahead and refresh our browser. We should see no changes inside the browser window because we haven't added any stylings yet. But now we've got our nav element set up, and we've got two classes set up for our styling, and that's what we're getting ready to start now. All right, so now let's go to our style sheet, our main.css file. First, we'll target the unordered list itself, and what I'm talking about is we're actually going to target this UL. That's the first thing we're going to target. And in order to do that, in order to do it very specifically, and we call it specificity in CSS, I'm actually going to target a class of main nav, so I'm going to go after that class, and the UL. So I'm going to say, look, I'm looking for any elements on my page that is inside a class of main nav and contains the tag UL. And in order to do that, this is how I'll do it in here. I'm actually going to scroll down. I'm actually going to make a navigation section for this. So I'm just going to copy this note, because normally I do section out my navigation systems inside my CSS files. And I'm just going to call this main navigation styles. And again, I do this because a lot of times your CSS files will become extremely large based on the size of your site. So it just gives me a way of actually sectionizing different portions of my styling. So I'm going to say main nav. Again, I'm using that period because it's a class. And I'm going to say main nav. I'm looking for the main nav class and the UL element or UL tag inside that class. First thing I'm going to do is list style type. So my list style type is going to be none. That's going to take away any fancy features with my UL. I'm going to set the margin at 0. I'm going to set the padding at 0. And I kind of repeating myself because if you remember when we actually did our CSS reset, we've actually reset all these. But I don't think in my reset I actually reset UL items. So let's actually go look for a second. And I did not. See, I could have actually accomplished the same thing by just adding this UL to this section of my mini reset, but we didn't. So we're going to stick with it the way we've written it. Then I'm going to do overflow hidden. This hides anything that's overflowing from that particular element. Very, very common when we're building navigation systems. And I'm going to give it a background color because I actually want the background of my navigation item to be a different color than the main page, obviously, because I want it to stand out. So I'm going to give it a 069. I'm going to go ahead and save all those changes. This is a great time for you to pause to go ahead and put these in. Let me explain real quick. The list style type specifies the type of list item marker in our list. You'll notice in the browser window I've got these little bullets. What I'm doing with this list style type is I'm taking those bullets away. The overflow property specifies that what happens if content overflows the element box. So we're just saying that, look, if you overflow the element box inside my UL, inside my element, just hide it. Don't let it overflow. Don't let it resize the box. Just hide that overflow. And that's basically what we're doing with the overflow. Margin and padding is pretty self-explanatory. Background color is very self-explanatory. So now what I want to do, let's go ahead and save all our changes. You should have typed all that in. I'm going to refresh my browser window. And you'll see now that we've got our elements and we've got the nice background color for our menu bar. Obviously, it doesn't look the way we want it to look yet, but it's starting to. Next thing I want to do is in my CSS file, let's begin work on the list elements themselves. And what I'm talking about now is we've styled the actual UL. Now let's start working on these LIs. Those are our actual list elements. Those are our actual selections for the menu. So the first thing I want to do in my CSS file, come down a couple lines, and I want to say main nav again because I want to stay inside that class. But now I want to say main nav li because I'm looking for the list elements inside that main nav class. And I'm going to give it one style. I'm going to say float left. When we float left, basically what we're doing is we're taking this item out of normal document flow. Normal document flow, we talked about that at the very beginning, is from top to bottom. So now I'm taking out of normal document flow. These are inline elements, which means they don't stretch the entire width of the browser window. So I'm saying, you know what? Float left. So they're going to stack up side by side when I float these left. And you'll see this when I save this change. Great time for you to type that in. Refresh my browser window. Now you'll notice that all our texts are side by side because they're inline elements now. And they've always been inline elements, but because of normal document flow, they stacked one on top of another. Now what I'm saying is I want you to float left. So basically they're going to the left edge and they're going side by side. And if I had enough of them, they'd fill up this entire line and they'd start a new line. So that's what we're doing when we do the floats. Now what I want to do is I want to add a little more code because obviously that is not going to work as a good navigation system. They're way too close to one another. They don't have any padding or margins. So what I want to do, and if you look, we've targeted the UL for our background. We've targeted the LI. Now to actually get to each individual link, we're actually going to target this anchor tag, this A element. And that's how we can actually finish up styling, or at least start to finish up styling, our menu system. So I'm going to come down right below where we set up the LI, and I'm going to say main nav once again. And by the way, I don't need to use this main nav. I'm using it because I want to get very specific because I'm going to have some different navigation on here with another UL. And obviously we're going to give that a different class in our footer so that then we can separate how we style those different ULs. And now I'm going to say LI A. So I want to look for any list element that's inside my name main nav that actually has an anchor tag. And now I'm going to say, look, I want you to display as a block element. That's my first thing. I want your color. Now I'm looking at the actual text color. I want it to be white. And we can actually use, there's about, I want to say 200 different text values for white, 256 if I'm not mistaken. I don't normally use the text for my colors, but I just want to show you that you can use, there's a group of colors that we can actually use with text. I want my text align to be center. So I want to center these in this box that we're creating. I want to set up padding. Now I'm going to go 14 pixels for top and bottom, and we've already talked about how we can set up these padding and margins, and 16 pixels left and right. Remember we talked about this thing being a clock face? We have top, right, bottom, left. If I only have two values, the first value is top and bottom, the second value is left and right. If I have one value, it's equal on all four sides. And if I have four values, it's going to be top, right, bottom, and left. We talked about that in an earlier exercise. And now I'm going to say text decoration. And the text decoration is going to be none. So I don't want any underlines, anything like that inside these anchor tags. I just want my text decoration none. I'm setting up a block now for my text to go into. Let's go ahead and save these changes. This is basically how I set up a basic navigation system with these three different types of styles inside my UL. Go ahead and get all those typed into your CSS file. I'm going to make sure everything is saved, and then I'm going to go into my browser window and refresh, and you'll see now we actually have a pretty decent looking navigation system based on the styling that we just put inside our CSS file. So as you can see, having a good understanding or a decent understanding of CSS and how we set up the HTML page structure, it's not really that difficult to set up an HTML page. So now let's move into styling the pseudo elements of the navigation system. And what I mean by pseudo elements, we can actually style interactions we have with some of these anchor tags, with some of these elements. Certain elements inside HTML have what's called pseudo elements, whether or not you're hovering over them, whether or not they're active. So there's different things that we can do. So what I'm going to do is go back into my style sheet. I want to come down, and again I want to say main nav because we're going to have two different nav systems on this page, and I did that on purpose so that you can see we can identify them by using these classes. I'm going to address my anchor tag. I'm going to put a colon and say hover. So now the hover is actually the pseudo element. And then I'm going to put in another element called not, and I'm going to put dot active. So I'm saying if you're not the active element and I'm hovering over you, so you're not active and I am hovering over you, this is what I want to happen. So I'm going to give a background color, and my background color is going to be pound 3CF. And again, I want you to notice that we're intermixing whether I'm using colors as text, whether I'm using colors as hexadecimal. You can do any of that inside CSS. And I want to change the text color to black. So I'm going to say pound 000. That's the hexadecimal value for black. Let's go ahead and save all these changes. I don't want to go there yet because I want to show you, or I don't want to go actually into the browser yet and show you what's going on because I want to show you where I'm getting these pseudo elements. All right, so if I go into my browser and if I go to the w3cschools.com website, you can actually go into css pseudoelements.asp. ASP, for anyone that's not aware, is active server pages. That means this is all being served from a database. Very similar to the site on Target HTML5, which is also served from a database. And that's why, if you notice, all my extensions are PHP, because I'm actually using the entire on Target HTML5 site is a dynamic website that's built from a database as you load it. But anyway, if you go to this page and you scroll down, you're going to see all these different pseudo elements that we can use inside of CSS. We have first line, we have font properties, we have first letter, and then it comes down and it breaks these down into a chart when you go down to the bottom that shows you all the different types of pseudo elements that are available inside CSS. And there's quite a few of them. And we use a lot of them to make very unique things happen on our websites. I would highly recommend, especially if you're really going to get into web development, that you do a lot of reading on the w3cschools.com site. The only problem I have with this site is it tends not to stay up to date because it is an extremely large site and because the specifications for HTML and CSS are changing so quickly. This site can tend to be a year or two behind the changes that are occurring inside the scripting language and inside CSS. So, great site to check out if you want to use them and if you want to learn things. But again, just keep in mind that sometimes it can be behind the power curve in as far as access to brand new information on the actual scripting language for HTML and the styling language for CSS. Now, if you type that in, let's go ahead and save all those changes. Let's go refresh our browser window just so you can see what occurred when we did that. If I refresh the browser window, we have no changes. But if I were to hover over anything that's not active, you'll notice now we're actually seeing that background color change. The reason the home is not changing, if you go back to our HTML structure, remember we gave that an active class? Inside our CSS, we said, if I hover over you and you're not active, if you're not part of the active class, I want this to occur. So you'll notice the background color changes and the text color changes as I hover over them. An important aspect as we're designing our CSS. All right, I want to add another style. Now let's add a style for that active class. So I'm going to say .mainNav. And again, I'm sticking with that class that we set up. And now I'm saying .active. So what you're seeing is here was we're actually using two different classes to set a style. I'm using the main nav class that we set up, and I'm using the active class that we set up. And all I'm saying here is background color. I want you to be 4CA F50, and what I'm doing is I'm making the active element that's on our menu have a background color of green. So if I save those changes, great time for you to pause to type that in, and I refresh our browser window, now you'll notice that active element has green. And all I need to do to change the active page, let's say that we created another page. And just for a second, I'm going to cut this out of here, Control X on the PC, Command X on the Mac. Let's say that this was my news page. Just by moving that class, I'm going to paste it in, Control V on the PC, Command V on the Mac, to the news page and saving the change. Now my active page is news. When I refresh, you'll notice that that green moves over to that page. So that's how you actually move the active element or the active class to the page that's being displayed. You just actually move that class in the menu system to that page. I'm going to go ahead and cut this out and put it back into our home page. Control X on the PC, Command X on the Mac, and then Control V on the PC, Command V on the Mac to paste it in place. Let's go ahead and save the change. And I just wanted you to see how we actually move which page is active based on the class that's assigned to that particular page. And again, that can be done a bunch of different ways. We can actually move that active class dynamically using JavaScript, kind of outside the realm of this introduction tutorial series, but there are a lot of different ways we can actually move that. The simplest way is the way that I just showed you, by actually moving the class as the new page loads. So let's save all of our changes. You've now built your navigation system or your main navigation system for your site. In the next lesson, we're actually going to lay out all this text so that our boxes and our graphics lay out the way we want them to lay out on our page. I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're learning a lot, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.